We're incredibly grateful for your support. Before we begin today's tale, tell us, which city or country are you joining us from? We love connecting with our global audience. Now, let's dive into today's story. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the colonial mansion's windows, creating patterns across Lowell Kelly's face as he adjusted his silk tie for the third time. His reflection in the antique mirror showed a man whose methodical nature was evident in every precise movement. From the way he smoothed down his silver-streaked hair to how he measured the symmetry of his Windsor, not with practiced eyes. The caterers are setting up in the garden, Thelma announced from the doorway, her voice carrying the kind of detachment that had become familiar over their 28 years of marriage. She moved through their bedroom with practiced grace, her designer dress whispering against the hardwood floors as she reached for her jewelry box. I hope you remember to have them set up the seafood station away from the direct sunlight. Lowell watched her through the mirror's reflection, noting how she avoided meeting his eyes. I handled it this morning. The station will be under the maple tree, with proper cooling systems in place. His response was automatic, efficient, like the spreadsheets he'd created to track every detail of their daughter's pre-wedding celebration. 25 years of forensic accounting had taught him the value of precision. Each number told a story, and tonight's story came with a price tag that would make most people flinch. $300,000 set aside in a trust fund for Christine's dream wedding. Every penny accounted for, every detail scrutinized with the same attention he gave to his professional cases. "Mother, have you seen my pearl earrings?" Christine's voice carried from the hallway, followed by the sound of quick footsteps. She appeared in the doorway, already dressed in a cream-colored cocktail dress that made her look more like her mother than ever. "The ones Grandmother Evans gave me?" Thelma turned from the vanity, her movements fluid but somehow tense. "Check your jewelry box in the guest room, darling. You moved some things there when Morris's family visited last weekend." The mention of Maurice Mitchell, Christine's fiancé, brought a smile to Lowell's face. The young surgeon had impressed him from their first meeting, not just with his credentials, but with his genuine devotion to Christine. It was the kind of match that made all those years of private school tuition and Ivy League education seem worth every dollar. "Found them," Christine's voice echoed down the hallway, followed by the sound of her heels clicking against the floor as she returned. "Dad, you look so handsome. That tie matches Mom's dress perfectly." Lowell turned from the mirror, finally facing his daughter directly. "Your mother's choice. She has an eye for these things." He reached for his wallet, a habitual gesture that reminded him of the fresh bank statement he'd reviewed that morning. The trust fund was secure, waiting to transform into the wedding of Christine's dreams. The doorbell chimed through the house, its melodic tone carrying up the curved staircase. "That'll be Anna," Thelma said, her tone shifting slightly. "She's always early." "I'll get it," Christine called out, her excitement evident in her quick steps down the stairs. Lowell followed at a more measured pace, his hand trailing along the polished banister. The sound of the front door opening was followed by his sister's familiar voice, though something in its pitch struck him as odd. "Christine, look at you." Anna's voice carried through the foyer. "Absolutely glowing. Marriage agrees with you already." Reaching the bottom of the stairs, Lowell watched as Anna embraced his daughter. His sister's hug seemed tighter than usual, her smile not quite reaching her eyes when she turned to him. "Brother dear," Anna stepped forward, her perfume too strong as she embraced him awkwardly. "The house looks amazing." Thelma's outdone herself with the decorations. Something felt off about her demeanor. A slight tremor in her hands, a flicker of something unreadable in her expression. But Lowell pushed the observation aside. Years of analyzing financial discrepancies had made him oversensitive to details, he told himself. This was a celebration, not an audit. Bradley's car just pulled up, Thelma announced from the top of the stairs, her voice carrying a note that Lowell would later wish he'd paid more attention to. "I'll let him in through the side entrance. He's bringing some paperwork you need to sign, Lowell." Lowell nodded absently, his mind already on the complex case Bradley Fletcher had been handling for him. The recovery of funds from a former client had proven more complicated than expected, but Bradley's 15 years as his divorce attorney had proven his worth time and again. "Mr. Kelly?" A familiar voice drew his attention to the doorway leading to his home office. Annette Palmer, his assistant of 12 years, stood there with a tablet in her hands, her usually composed expression showing signs of concern. "Could I have a moment of your time? There's something about the wedding trust fund that needs your attention." "Of course." Lowell turned to Anna and Christine. "Excuse me for a moment. Why don't you both check on the flower arrangements in the garden? The florist should be finishing up." As he followed Annette into his office, the sounds of the gathering party filtered through the windows. Caterers calling out instructions, the click of glasses being arranged, the low hum of early arriving guests. His office, with its walls of law books and filing cabinets, felt like a fortress of order amid the growing chaos outside. "What's the concern, Annette?" He settled behind his desk, the leather chair creaking softly. Annette's fingers tightened around her tablet. "Sir, there have been some unusual inquiries about the trust fund. Someone's been asking about early withdrawal options, trying to determine if there are any loopholes in the documentation." Lowell's expression remained neutral, years of professional poker faces serving him well. "Who made these inquiries?" "The requests came through Mr. Fletcher's office," Annette said carefully. "But they weren't logged in the usual way. I only noticed because I was updating the wedding vendor payment schedule." Before Lowell could respond, voices drifted through his partially open window. The garden below his office had always been Thelma's pride, its carefully maintained topiaries and winding paths creating numerous private corners and conversation spots. Now, it carried his wife's voice with unexpected clarity. "That doormat paycheck? He's too busy writing checks for the wedding." Thelma's tone held a contempt he'd never heard before. "Thelma, be careful." Anna's urgent whisper followed. "Lowell could see you with him." Lowell stood slowly, years of training keeping his movements controlled even as his mind raced through possibilities and implications. He gestured for Annette to remain silent as he moved closer to the window. The sound of footsteps on gravel, then Bradley Fletcher's distinctive voice. "Everything's in place. The paperwork's ready whenever you are." "Mr. Kelly?" Annette's voice was barely a whisper. "Should I pull up the trust fund documentation?" Lowell held up a hand for silence, his other hand already reaching for his phone. Years of gathering evidence had taught him the value of documentation. With practiced movements, he opened the recording app just as Thelma's laugh floated up from below. "Let's use the gazebo," she was saying. "It's more private." Lowell moved with quiet efficiency, years of examining fraud cases guiding his actions. "Annette, I need you to do something for me. Go to the garden party entrance and keep Christine occupied. Don't let her near the gazebo." Annette nodded, understanding in her eyes as she slipped out of the office. Lowell waited until her footsteps faded before making his way down the back stairs, phone recording in his pocket. The garden paths were familiar territory, each turn and hedge placed according to the landscape designer's exact specifications. The gazebo, a white wooden structure that had hosted countless family photos, stood at the far end of the property, partially hidden by carefully maintained topiaries. As he approached, the sounds became clearer, murmured words, the rustle of clothing, a soft laugh that twisted something in his chest. He rounded the final corner just as Anna stepped out from behind a sculpted bush, her face flushed with either guilt or embarrassment. "Brother, she's drunk." Anna's excuse came too quickly, too rehearsed. But Thelma was already straightening her dress, no sign of intoxication in her steady movements or clear eyes. Her smirk, directed not at him, but at Bradley, held years of hidden contempt. "Actually, I'm not." She smoothed her hair with practiced fingers. "Bradley and I are running away with your wedding fund. Sue me, you'll never win." Lowell felt the weight of his phone in his pocket, still recording. His hands remained steady, the same steadiness that had served him through countless depositions and court appearances. "Let me remind you, this is a fault-based divorce state." The words came out calm, measured, as if he were simply stating facts in a case review. But beneath that professional exterior, his mind was already racing through statutes and precedents, through years of financial records and legal documents. Bradley's expression shifted from shock to calculation, the look of a lawyer assessing damage control. But before anyone could speak again, the sound of approaching voices broke through the tension. "Mom? Dad?" Christine's voice carried from the garden path. The first guests are arriving. Thelma's mask slipped back into place with practiced ease. We should head back, she said, her voice carrying none of the contempt from moments before. We wouldn't want to keep our guests waiting. As they made their way back to the main garden, Lowell felt the weight of his phone, now evidence, in his pocket. Years of tracking financial fraud had taught him that the biggest betrayals often came wrapped in the most convincing disguises. But for now, he had a party to host, a daughter to protect, and a facade to maintain. The evening sun cast long shadows across the garden, turning the champagne glasses into prisms of light and shadow. Guests began filling the spaces between carefully arranged tables and flowers, their cheerful conversations creating a surreal backdrop to the scene that had just unfolded. Lowell watched as Thelma moved through the crowd, playing the perfect hostess with practiced charm. Bradley circulated separately, occasionally glancing toward her with what now seemed like obvious meaning. Anna hovered at the edges of conversations, her usual social confidence replaced by a nervous energy that made more sense with each passing moment. "Dad!" Christine appeared at his elbow, her face glowing with happiness that made his heart ache. "Maurice just called. He's running a little late. Emergency surgery. But he'll be here soon." Lowell managed a smile, years of professional composure serving him well. Of course, a surgeon's schedule is never entirely his own. He watched his daughter move through the crowd, greeting guests with genuine warmth, completely unaware of how close her dream wedding was to becoming collateral damage in her mother's betrayal. The party continued as the sun set, lights twinkling in the gardens like stars brought down to earth. Lowell played his role perfectly, the proud father, the generous host, the successful professional. But beneath it all, his mind worked with the precise attention to detail that had made him one of the most respected forensic accountants in the state. Every laugh from Thelma now carried new meaning. Every glance between her and Bradley became evidence. Every nervous movement from Anna added another piece to a puzzle he wished he'd never had to solve. As the last guests departed and the caterers began their cleanup, Lowell stood in his office, phone in hand. The recording would need to be properly secured, copies made and stored safely. The trust fund documentation would need to be reviewed, every possible loophole examined and closed. Through the window, he could see Thelma directing the cleanup crew, every gesture confident and controlled. She played her role flawlessly for years, the devoted wife, the loving mother. Now he wondered how many other performances he'd mistaken for truth. The night air carried the fading scent of flowers and the lingering notes of celebration. But beneath it all, Lowell could smell something else. The familiar scent of fraud and betrayal that he'd spent his career exposing in others' lives. Now it had found its way into his own home, hidden behind smiles and wrapped in wedding plans. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and bank statements, confrontations and consequences. But tonight he had evidence to secure and plans to make. After all, numbers never lied, even when people did. And Lowell Kelly had spent 25 years learning to read the stories that numbers told. The trust fund he'd created for Christine's wedding might have been Thelma's target, but she'd forgotten one crucial detail. In all his years of forensic accounting, Lowell had never lost a case where he had the numbers on his side. And this time, he had more than numbers. He had irrefutable proof of betrayal, captured in the clinical clarity of a digital recording. As he began making copies of the evidence, Lowell allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. Thelma and Bradley thought they were dealing with a doormat who wrote checks. They were about to discover they were dealing with something far more dangerous. A forensic accountant with nothing left to lose except his daughter's happiness. The night grew deeper, but Lowell's work was just beginning. In his office, surrounded by the tools of his trade, computers, financial records, legal documents, he started building his case. Each piece of evidence carefully logged, each detail noted with the same precision he'd used throughout his career. Somewhere in the house, Thelma was probably already making plans of her own. But she'd forgotten the first rule of financial fraud. The evidence always tells the truth, even when people don't. And Lowell had spent his life learning to read that truth in bank statements and paper trails. The betrayal stung, But the methodical work of gathering evidence helped dull the pain. After all, numbers were reliable. Numbers didn't lie or betray. Numbers didn't pretend to love you for 28 years while plotting to steal your daughter's wedding fund. As he worked through the night, Lowell could hear the occasional sound of Thelma moving through the house above. Each footstep now carried new meaning. Not the familiar rhythm of his wife preparing for bed, but the calculated movements of someone whose mask had finally slipped. The foundation had been laid for what would become the most important case of his career. Not because of the money involved. He'd handled much larger sums in his professional life. But because this time, the fraud had struck at the heart of everything he'd spent his life building. But that was tomorrow's battle. Tonight, he had evidence to secure and a defense to build. After all, the best revenge against financial fraud wasn't anger. It was documentation. And Lowell Kelly had just begun documenting the biggest case of his life. The morning sun hadn't yet burned through the fog when Lowell pulled into the parking lot of Bean's Cafe. His hand still remembered the weight of his phone from the previous night, the damning evidence now safely backed up in 3 different locations. The cafe's neon open sign cut through the early morning haze, a beacon of normalcy on what promised to be anything but a normal day. Diana Bean looked up from behind the counter as the bell above the door announced his arrival. 20 years of friendship showed in her immediate frown of concern. "You look like you haven't slept. Is Felix here yet?" Lowell's voice carried the roughness of a sleepless night. "Back booth." Diana gestured toward the far corner of the cafe, where Felix Stout's imposing figure hunched over a stack of papers. "Want me to bring your usual?" "Just coffee." "Black." Lowell paused, then added, "And maybe keep it coming." Felix Stout's reputation as the state's most feared divorce attorney was evident in his bearing even while seated. He looked up as Lowell approached, sharp eyes taking in every detail of his appearance. "You said it was urgent. Start from the beginning." Lowell slid into the booth, placing his phone on the table between them. "Bradley Fletcher is having an affair with my wife. They're planning to steal my daughter's wedding fund." Felix's expression didn't change, but his hand stilled over the legal pad where he'd been making notes. Bradley Fletcher. Of course. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. "I've been waiting for him to slip up like this." Diana appeared with coffee, setting down 2 mugs with practiced efficiency. "Should I give you privacy?" "No," Felix said before Lowell could respond. "You might want to hear this." In fact, he pulled several photographs from the folder. "These were taken here, weren't they?" Diana leaned over, examining the pictures of Thelma and Bradley at one of her corner tables. Every Tuesday for the past few months, they called it her yoga class. A hint of steel entered her voice. "They didn't notice me in the background of their selfies. Amateurs, show me everything," Felix commanded, spreading documents across the table. Bradley's been planning this for months. He's pulled similar schemes with other clients' wives, but he's never been caught on video before. Lowell pulled out his phone, playing the recording from the previous night. The voices were crystal clear. Thelma's contempt, Bradley's smugness, Anna's attempted cover-up. Each word felt like another nail in a coffin he hadn't known he was building. "Perfect," Felix muttered, making rapid notes. "The audio quality is excellent. Your forensic background shows." He looked up sharply. "Speaking of which, how thoroughly have you reviewed Bradley's case files from when he was representing you?" "I started digging last night." Lowell pulled out his laptop. "The complex case he's been handling for me, the recovery of funds from a former client. Something about it never felt quite right. I think now I know why." Felix's smile had all the warmth of a shark's. "Show me." For the next hour, they dissected financial records and case files. Diana kept the coffee flowing, occasionally adding her own observations about Thelma and Bradley's Tuesday meetings. The morning crowd began filtering in, their mundane conversations about breakfast orders creating a surreal backdrop to the dismantling of Lowell's marriage. "Look at this pattern." Lowell pointed to a spreadsheet he compiled overnight. 3 other clients lost their wives and substantial assets to him. The signatures on these documents. They were too embarrassed to report it. Felix finished studying the numbers. "But with your evidence," he pulled out his phone. "I need to make a call. There's someone you should meet." 20 minutes later, Pablo Alexander walked into Bean's Cafe. The chairman of the State Bar Association's Ethics Committee carried himself with the quiet authority of someone used to making career-ending decisions. "Lowell, it's been too long." "Since college," Lowell agreed, standing to shake his old roommate's hand. "I wish it were under better circumstances." Pablo settled into the booth, accepting the coffee Diana silently placed before him. "Felix filled me in. Show me what you've found." The evidence spread across the table like a roadmap of betrayal, bank statements, case files, photographs, and the damning audio recording. Pablo's expression grew darker with each new piece. "Keep gathering evidence," he advised, making his own notes. "We'll need to prove a pattern of misconduct. This goes beyond a simple divorce case." "There's more," Felix interjected. "Show him what you found about Anna." Lowell's hands trembled slightly as he pulled up another set of bank records. "My sister. She's been receiving monthly payments from Bradley for a year. $5,000 each month, deposited into an offshore account." Pablo's sharp intake of breath spoke volumes. "Your own sister? Paid to help orchestrate my humiliation." The words tasted bitter. She knew everything. Probably helped plan it. The cafe had filled up around them, the morning rush creating a buffer of noise that made their conversation feel more private than it was. Diana appeared periodically to refill coffee cups and clear away empty plates, her presence a silent reminder that some friendships remain true. "We need to move carefully," Felix warned, organizing the documents into distinct piles. "Bradley's smart. He'll have contingency plans, but not smart enough," Pablo noted, tapping the phone with the recording. He never expected a forensic accountant to catch him in the act. The bell above the cafe door chimed again, and Lowell looked up to see Christine entering. Her face showed the strain of a sleepless night, her usual grace replaced by uncertainty. "Dad?" Her voice carried across the cafe. "Mom's acting strange. She's packing her things, saying something about the wedding being canceled." Felix and Pablo exchanged glances. "She's moving faster than we expected," Felix muttered. Lowell stood, gathering the evidence with practiced efficiency. "I need to handle this." He turned to Felix. "How quickly can you file?" "Give me 2 hours. Go home. Deal with your daughter. I'll have everything ready by noon." The drive home felt surreal, Christine silent in the passenger seat. The morning fog had burned away, leaving behind a clarity that seemed almost too sharp. Every detail stood out with painful precision. The way his daughter's hands twisted in her lap, the familiar turns toward their colonial mansion, the weight of truth waiting to be told. They found Thelma in the master bedroom, clothes strewn across the bed. She turned as they entered, her expression a mixture of defiance and calculated victimhood. "The wedding's off," she announced, folding another designer dress into a suitcase. "Your father's a controlling obsessive who's been tracking me." Christine's confusion was evident in her voice. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Lowell's phone felt heavy in his pocket, but his voice remained steady. "Show her Thelma. Show her why you're really leaving." "I've already transferred the money," Thelma said with a smirk that didn't quite hide her uncertainty. "The wedding fund is gone. You'll never prove anything." Instead of responding, Lowell pulled out his phone and played the recording from the previous night. The sound of Thelma's voice filled the room. "Bradley and I are running away with your wedding fund. Sue me, you'll never win." Christine's face drained of color as the recording continued. When it finished, Lowell quietly pulled up the surveillance photos. Months of Tuesday meetings at Bean's Cafe, secret rendezvous captured in damning detail. "You were going to steal my wedding fund?" Christine's voice cracked. "My wedding fund? Your father is manipulating you." Thelma tried, but the evidence was too clear, too overwhelming. "The trust fund," Lowell said quietly, "has an ironclad condition. Only Christine can withdraw the funds, and only for her wedding." "How long have you been trying to break into it, Thelma?" The sound of a car in the driveway interrupted whatever response Thelma might have made. Through the bedroom window, they could see Bradley's expensive sedan pulling up. "Perfect timing," Thelma said, reaching for her suitcase. "Bradley will explain everything." "Yes," Lowell agreed, checking his phone as a text from Felix appeared. "Let's all hear Bradley explain, especially about the other wives, the other stolen funds. The pattern of fraud that the State Bar Association is very interested in. Thelma's step faltered. What are you talking about? Did you think you were special, Thelma? The first? Ask him about the others. Ask him what happened to their money. Lowell's voice carried the weight of 25 years of forensic investigation. Better yet, ask my sister what she did with her monthly payments for helping him target me. The color drained from Thelma's face. Anna? What about Anna? $5,000 a month, Lowell said quietly. That's what my sister's betrayal cost. Bradley's been paying her for a year. Did you know that part of the plan? Christine's gasp of shock cut through the room. And Anna? She helped you try to steal my wedding fund? The doorbell rang, its cheerful chime incongruous with the tension in the room. No one moved to answer it. It's probably the process server, Lowell noted, checking his phone again. Felix works quickly when properly motivated. And Pablo, you remember Pablo Alexander from the State Bar Association? He's particularly interested in Bradley's pattern of behavior. Thelma's composure cracked. You're lying. Bradley said it was foolproof. He said what he said to other wives, in other houses, before other betrayals. Lowell's voice remained steady. The difference is, this time he tried it with a forensic accountant who specializes in tracking financial fraud. And this time he got caught on tape. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. You should answer it, Lowell suggested. After all, Bradley will want to know that his pattern has finally caught up with him. That all those careful plans, all those Tuesday yoga classes at Bean's Cafe, all those secret payments to my sister, it's all documented now. All admissible in court. Christine moved to stand beside her father, her voice shaking but determined. I want to hear Bradley explain. I want to hear him tell me why he thought he could steal my wedding fund. The doorbell's third ring was accompanied by a loud knock. You can't prove anything, Thelma said, but her voice lacked conviction. Actually, Lowell replied, thanks to your performance in the gazebo last night, we can prove everything. The only question is how many other wives will come forward once they know they're not alone. How many other families did you and Bradley target? How many other sisters did he pay to help destroy their brothers' marriages? The knocking grew more insistent. You should answer it, Lowell repeated. After all, this is what you wanted, isn't it? A confrontation? A chance to show everyone how you've outsmarted your doormat husband? His smile held no warmth. Just not quite the confrontation you planned. Christine moved toward the door, her steps determined despite her obvious distress. I'll get it. I want to see Bradley's face when he realizes what you've discovered. As she left the room, Thelma seemed to deflate, the weight of exposure finally cracking her carefully maintained facade. How long have you known? About your affair? Since last night. About Bradley's pattern of targeting his clients' wives? Since about 3 a.m. when I started really digging into his case files. About my sister's involvement? Lowell's voice hardened. That was a surprise. $5,000 a month to help destroy her brother's marriage. I wonder if she thinks it was worth it. From downstairs came the sound of voices. Christine's clear tones cutting through Bradley's attempts at smooth explanations. Then another voice joined them. Felix Stout's distinctive baritone carrying up the stairs. That will be your copy of the divorce papers, Lowell noted. Felix is nothing if not efficient. You might want to read them carefully, particularly the parts about Bradley's pattern of professional misconduct and your conspiracy to commit fraud. Thelma's response was cut off by the sound of footsteps on the stairs, multiple sets, moving with purpose. You should have remembered one thing, Lowell said quietly as the footsteps drew closer. In all my years as a forensic accountant, I've never lost a case where I had the numbers on my side. And this time I have more than numbers. I have proof of every meeting, every plan, every betrayal. The bedroom door opened wider as Christine returned, flanked by Felix Stout and a court officer holding legal documents. Bradley trailed behind them, his usual confidence notably absent. Now then, Felix said, his smile carrying all the warmth of a predator's grin. Shall we discuss the terms of surrender? The courthouse corridors buzzed with whispered conversations as Felix Stout organized his documents at the plaintiff's table. 6 months of meticulous preparation had led to this moment. Across the aisle, Bradley Fletcher adjusted his tie with less than his usual confidence, while Thelma sat rigid beside him, her designer outfit a stark contrast to her drawn expression. "All rise." The bailiff's voice cut through the murmurs. Judge Margaret Chin entered the courtroom, her reputation for zero tolerance of legal misconduct preceding her. Felix's systematic dismantling of Bradley's defense began with a simple USB drive. "Your Honor, I present Exhibit A, an audio recording from the night of June 15th. The familiar voices filled the courtroom. Thelma's contempt, Bradley's smugness, the raw evidence of their betrayal. Bradley's attorney leaned forward. "Objection, Your Honor. This recording was obtained without consent." In a public space, Felix countered smoothly, where there was no reasonable expectation of privacy. Furthermore, the state's single-party consent law clearly overruled. Judge Chin's voice carried the weight of 20 years on the bench. "Continue, Mr. Stout." From his seat behind Felix, Lowell watched as months of evidence unfurled like a carefully orchestrated symphony. Financial records, surveillance photos, witness testimonies, each piece revealing another layer of Bradley and Thelma's scheme. "Your Honor," Felix gestured to his next witness, "I call Mrs. Diana Bean to the stand." Diana walked forward, her cafe owner's apron replaced by a conservative suit. Under oath, she detailed every Tuesday meeting, every whispered conversation, every photograph she'd quietly documented. "They called it her yoga class," she testified, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. "They never noticed me in the background of their selfies." The gallery's subtle shift when Anna took the stand was palpable. She'd agreed to testify for Thelma, but Felix's cross-examination was relentless. "Ms. Evans, can you explain these bank deposits?" Felix held up statements showing monthly $5,000 payments. "Payments from Mr. Fletcher's offshore account to yours, beginning exactly 1 year before your brother's marriage imploded." Anna's composure cracked. Wasn't what, Ms. Evans? Wasn't meant to help orchestrate your brother's humiliation? Wasn't payment for helping Mr. Fletcher target another client's marriage?" The silence in the courtroom grew heavy as Anna crumbled under questioning. In the gallery, Christine gripped Morris's hand, watching her aunt's betrayal laid bare in clinical detail. Pablo Alexander's testimony as chairman of the State Bar Association's Ethics Committee carried the weight of institutional authority. "Mr. Fletcher's pattern is clear," he stated, spreading documentation across the witness stand. 3 previous cases where clients' wives and substantial assets were targeted. But this time, he held up the USB drive containing Lowell's recording. "This time, we have irrefutable proof." During a recess, Lowell found himself in the courthouse garden, the autumn air crisp against his face. Christine joined him, her expression thoughtful. "Dad?" She wrapped her coat tighter against the chill. "Maurice and I have been talking about the wedding." Lowell turned, studying his daughter's face. "Whatever you want to do, sweetheart. The trust fund is still there, still yours. That's just it." Christine's voice grew stronger. "I don't want a big wedding anymore. Not after." She gestured toward the courthouse. "We want something smaller, more meaningful. And the money." Her eyes met his. "We want to donate it to help other families affected by financial fraud." Before Lowell could respond, Felix's assistant hurried out. They're reconvening. Judge Chin's ready to rule on the ethics violations. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Chun adjusted her glasses. The evidence presented leaves no room for doubt. Mr. Fletcher has demonstrated a pattern of professional misconduct that strikes at the very heart of attorney-client trust. His law license is hereby suspended pending further investigation by the State Bar Association. Bradley's face drained of color as the judge continued. Furthermore, given Mrs. Kelly's signed prenuptial agreement and her documented attempt to misappropriate trust fund assets, I award full control of all marital assets to Mr. Kelly. 2 weeks later, Lowell stood in his parents' living room, the weight of family history hanging in gilt-framed photographs on the walls. His father, retired Judge William Evans, sat in his favorite leather chair, listening as Lowell detailed Anna's betrayal. The silence that followed Lowell's revelation seemed to stretch for ages. Finally, William Evans stood, his movements deliberate as he walked to his desk. "Harrison," He called to his lawyer waiting in the study. "Bring me the will." Anna's face crumpled as their father signed the documents. "No daughter of mine profits from destroying her brother's marriage," he declared, his voice carrying the same authority it had held during his years on the bench. "You've chosen your path, Anna. Now live with the consequences." Spring arrived with cherry blossoms and new beginnings. Christine and Morris's garden wedding transformed the same space where Thelma's betrayal had been exposed into something healing and new. Diana Bean's catering staff moved efficiently through the intimate gathering, her cafe's success now bolstered by her role in exposing the scandal. Lowell adjusted his tie, a gesture that no longer carried the weight of routine, but felt like preparation for joy. Beside him, Annette smoothed his lapel, her presence a reminder that loyalty and support could blossom into something deeper. The foundation's paperwork came through, she mentioned, watching the guests arrive. The wedding fund has already helped 3 families affected by similar schemes. News had spread about Anna's involvement in other divorces, leading to multiple civil suits. She'd moved across the country, her role in similar schemes exposed through Bradley's meticulous records. The family's ostracism had followed her, a consequence of betrayal that no distance could erase. Bradley's disbarment had become final 2 weeks earlier, his reputation in tatters. Thelma, stripped of everything by her own prenup, had moved in with a cousin in another state. Their attempts to access the wedding fund had backfired spectacularly. The ironclad condition that only Christine could withdraw the funds, and only for her wedding, had protected it from their schemes. Felix raised his glass as the small gathering settled for dinner. To justice served cold, his voice carried across the intimate space, and family bonds strengthened by fire. Lowell watched his daughter dance with Maurice, their movements full of the kind of joy that no betrayal could diminish. The wedding fund that Thelma and Bradley had tried to steal now served a greater purpose, a charitable foundation helping other victims of financial fraud rebuild their lives. Annette's hand found his as the music played. Around them, true family and loyal friends celebrated not just a wedding, but a victory over betrayal. The garden that had witnessed deception now bloomed with new life, proof that sometimes losing a false family made room for a truer one. The late afternoon sun caught the cherry blossoms, creating a natural confetti that seemed to bless the gathering. Christine's smaller, more meaningful wedding had become something more than a response to betrayal. It was a statement about what really mattered. Morris's best man, a fellow surgeon, clinked his glass for attention. "When I first met Christine," he began, "she told me she wanted a fairy tale wedding. Looking around today, I'd say she got something better. She got a true story, with all its complexity and triumph." Diana Bean, moving among the tables ensuring everything was perfect, paused to squeeze Lowell's shoulder. Her cafe had become something of a local legend after the scandal broke, proving that standing up for truth had its own rewards. Pablo Alexander, attending as both friend and ethics committee chairman, shared quiet conversation with Felix about the broader implications of Bradley's case. 3 other firms have already revised their client protection policies, he noted. Sometimes justice creates ripples we never expected. As evening approached, Christine found a moment alone with her father near the same gazebo where everything had changed. "You know what's funny, Dad? If Mom and Bradley hadn't tried to steal the wedding fund, we might never have discovered who they really were. Sometimes betrayal is a gift in disguise." Lowell considered his daughter's words, remembering the methodical accountant who had once measured his life in spreadsheets and bank statements. That man still existed, but he'd learned that the truest audits weren't of numbers, but of character. The foundation they'd created from the wedding fund had already begun its work, turning betrayal into blessing. Each family they helped was another victory over the kind of scheme that had nearly destroyed their own. "Ready to dance with your old man?" Lowell asked as a new song began. Christine's smile, so like her younger self, before all the betrayal, lit up her face. "Always." They moved onto the dance floor, where Maurice waited his turn with patent good humor. Around them, the small gathering of true friends and loyal family created the kind of warmth that no amount of money could buy. Felix, now more friend than attorney, watched from the sidelines with satisfaction. His dismantling of Bradley's defense had been masterful, but this moment of genuine joy was the real victory. The cherry blossoms continued their gentle descent as day faded into evening. Staff from Bean's Cafe moved quietly through the gathering, their service a reminder of how small acts of observation and loyalty had helped expose a greater truth. Annette caught Lowell's eye across the garden, her smile carrying the promise of future dances. Sometimes, he reflected, the best things in life came not from careful planning, but from learning who to trust in moments of crisis. The garden lights came on as dusk approached, transforming the space where betrayal had been exposed into something magical. Christine and Morris's smaller wedding had become exactly what they needed, not a show of wealth, but a celebration of truth and resilience. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The foundation would need attention, other families would need help, and life would continue its complex dance. But tonight, in this garden where everything had changed, they celebrated something powerful. The discovery that sometimes losing a false family makes room for a truer one. As the stars began to appear above the cherry blossoms, Lowell allowed himself to fully release the weight of the past year. The forensic accountant in him had tracked every detail, every number, every betrayal. But the man he'd become understood that the truest wealth wasn't in bank accounts or trust funds. It was in knowing who stood beside you when everything else fell apart. The wedding fund that Thelma had tried to steal had transformed into something far more valuable. A foundation for helping others, a testament to resilience, and proof that even the deepest betrayals could lead to unexpected blessings. 5 years later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the Kelly Foundation's new headquarters, casting warm light across the polished conference table where Lowell reviewed the quarterly reports. What had started as Christine's transformed wedding fund had grown into something none of them had anticipated. A nationally recognized organization helping victims of financial fraud and predatory divorce schemes. The Philadelphia office opened last week. Annette Kelly, noted as she set down a fresh cup of coffee beside him. Their wedding rings caught the morning light, a 3-year reminder that sometimes life's harshest betrayals led to unexpected blessings. That makes 7 regional offices now. Lowell nodded, studying the impact statistics on his tablet. 312 families helped last year alone, each one a story like ours. He paused, remembering. Did you see the latest news about Bradley? Bradley Fletcher's fall from grace had become a cautionary tale in legal circles. After his disbarment, he'd attempted to reinvent himself as a legal consultant in Arizona, but his past had followed him. 3 of his former victims, emboldened by the Kelly's success, had filed civil suits. The resulting judgments had stripped him of his remaining assets. Page 6 of the Bar Association Journal, Annette pulled up the article on her tablet. Apparently he's working as a paralegal in a strip mall law office. Quite a fall for someone who used to have the corner office in the city's most prestigious firm. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Felix Stout entered, his imposing figure now softened slightly by 5 years of friendship. Ready for the board meeting? Christine's on her way up. The Foundation's board meetings had become a monthly reminder of how their extended family had evolved. Christine, now head of victim advocacy, arrived with Maurice. Their 2-year-old daughter, Hope, immediately ran to her grandfather, demanding her usual perch on his lap during meetings. Dad, Christine kissed his cheek. Wait until you hear about our latest case. It's almost identical to what Mom and Bradley tried. She'd long since stopped hesitating over mentioning Thelma. The wound transformed into wisdom that helped others. Diana Bean arrived next, her catering business having expanded into a successful restaurant chain. She'd parlayed her role in exposing the scandal into a reputation for integrity that attracted customers who appreciated both her food and her principles. Speaking of your mother, Diana said as she settled into her seat, my cousin in Seattle saw her last month, working as a sales clerk in a department store. Apparently, the cousin she moved in with finally got tired of supporting her. The news created barely a ripple around the table. Thelma's attempts to rebuild her life had been hampered by her own inability to accept responsibility. The prenup she'd signed in their younger, happier days had left her with nothing but her personal possessions. Her attempts to contest it had failed spectacularly, especially after Judge Chin's blistering remarks about her conduct became part of the public record. The Seattle office might want to know, Christine mused. They're handling 3 cases of attorney-client betrayal right now. It's amazing how many Bradley Fletcher copycats are out there. Pablo Alexander joined them via video conference. His role as ethics committee chairman now expanded to include consulting for bar associations in other states. The Fletcher Protocol is being adopted in 4 more jurisdictions next month, he reported. The guidelines for preventing attorney-client exploitation had become his legacy project. Has anyone heard from Anna recently? Maurice asked, immediately regretting the question as the room grew quiet. Lowell's sister had tried to rebuild her life in California, but the civil suits from other families she'd helped Bradley target had followed her across the country. Her role in multiple schemes had come to light through Bradley's meticulous records, leading to judgments that garnished her wages and destroyed her social standing. Mom ran into her at Grandma Evans' funeral last year, Christine said quietly. She tried to apologize, said she never thought it would go so far. But trust is like reputation. Once it's gone, no apology can bring it back. The meeting proceeded with updates from each department. The foundation had evolved beyond its original scope, now offering not just financial assistance but legal support, counseling, and advocacy for legislative changes to prevent similar schemes. The documentary premiered at Sundance, Felix reported, pulling up the reviews. The Hidden Pattern detailed Bradley and Thelma's scheme alongside similar cases, showcasing the foundation's work in helping victims rebuild their lives. They're calling it a wake-up call for the legal profession. Later that afternoon, Lowell stood at his office window, watching the city bustle below. The foundation's success had exceeded everyone's expectations, turning personal pain into public purpose. The wedding fund that Thelma and Bradley had tried to steal now generated millions in assistance for others facing similar betrayals. His phone buzzed with a text from William Evans, his father. The retired judge had become one of the foundation's strongest advocates, his legal expertise helping shape their advocacy work. The family's painful fracture over Anna's betrayal had strengthened the bonds between those who remained loyal. Grandpa! Hope's voice carried through the office as she escaped Christine's grasp, running to show him her latest drawing. Her innocent joy was perhaps the purest symbol of their recovery, a new generation untouched by old betrayals. The foundation's walls displayed framed news articles chronicling their journey. Disgraced attorney's scheme leads to national reform, read one headline. Another showed Bradley's disbarment hearing, his once confident smirk replaced by defeated resignation. A third featured Thelma being escorted from court after her failed attempt to contest the prenup. The Richardson case settled, Annette announced, entering with fresh documents. Full restitution. Plus they're using our template for the trust fund protection clause. The same legal provision that had protected Christine's wedding fund now helped other families secure their assets. Evening found them gathered at Bean's Cafe, now a local landmark. Diana's original location had become their unofficial meeting place, its walls adorned with subtle reminders of its role in exposing truth. The Tuesday afternoon table where Thelma and Bradley had plotted now bore a small plaque. Justice begins with observation. Remember when they thought this place was just their convenient meeting spot? Diana mused, joining them after the dinner rush. Never noticed me in the background, taking notes, watching them plot against their own families. The cafe had become something of a pilgrimage site for their clients, a reminder that sometimes the smallest actions, a cafe owner's careful observation, an assistant's loyal warning, a daughter's unwavering faith, could unravel the grandest schemes. Dad? Christine's voice drew him back to the present. We're expanding the youth program next month. Children of divorce fraud victims, helping them understand it's not their fault. Her own experience had shaped the foundation's holistic approach to healing. Maurice, now chief of surgery at his hospital, watched his wife with evident pride. Their small garden wedding had set the tone for their marriage. Authentic, meaningful, focused on what truly mattered. Hope, playing with her dessert, was living proof that joy could follow betrayal. Felix's phone buzzed with news from a colleague in Arizona. Bradley's trying to move again, he reported. Seems his past keeps catching up with him. No law office wants to risk their reputation by hiring him, even as a paralegal. And Thelma? Annette asked, though they all knew the answer. Still trying to sell her story to tabloids, Christine sighed. But no one's interested anymore. It's old news, and she's not the victim she pretends to be. The foundation's success had overshadowed the scandal that sparked it. What began as a personal betrayal had grown into a movement, helping hundreds of families protect themselves from similar schemes. Bradley and Thelma's attempt to steal a wedding fund had instead created an enduring legacy of protection and support for others. Anna's children, now teenagers, sometimes reached out to their cousins via social media, trying to understand their mother's choices. Christine maintained careful boundaries, kind but firm in her refusal to let the next generation be drawn into old conflicts. The Richardson kids are enrolling in our summer program, Annette mentioned. Their father said something interesting, that watching our family rebuild gave him hope that his own could heal. Hope climbed into her grandfather's lap, oblivious to the deeper currents of conversation around her. Her presence was a reminder that life moved forward, that new joy could grow in soil once poisoned by betrayal. The cafe's evening crowd included several foundation clients, their grateful glances acknowledgement of battles fought and won. Each family they helped was another victory over the kind of scheme that had nearly destroyed their own. Next month's ethics conference, Pablo noted via group text, has a whole session dedicated to the Fletcher Protocol. Bradley's schemes ended up changing the legal profession, just not the way he planned. As night fell over the city, the cafe's warm lights reflected in windows that had once witnessed betrayal. Lowell looked around the table at his true family, not just those related by blood or marriage, but the loyal friends who had stood witness to truth. The wedding fund that Thelma and Bradley had coveted had multiplied beyond their grandest schemes, but not in dollars. Instead, it had grown into something far more valuable, a foundation of truth, a legacy of protection, and proof that sometimes life's deepest wounds could become its greatest gifts. Outside, the city moved through its evening rhythm, unaware that within this cafe, a group of people who had faced betrayal and emerged stronger gathered to celebrate not just survival, but transformation. They had turned a story of deception into a legacy of protection, proof that sometimes the worst intentions could lead to the best outcomes. Lowell raised his glass in their private tradition. To justice served cold, he began. And family bonds strengthened by fire, they finished together, their voices carrying the weight of experience and the lightness of triumph. In the years since Thelma and Bradley's schemes unraveled, they had built something no one could steal, a legacy of truth, protection, and redemption. The wedding fund they had tried to take had become something far more valuable, a foundation that turned betrayal into blessing, not just for one family, but for hundreds. Hope's laughter rang through the cafe, a sound that belonged to the future rather than the past. In her joy, Lowell saw the final victory over those who had tried to destroy his family. The simple fact that life moved forward, that love prevailed, and that sometimes losing a false family made room for a truer one to grow. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.